Welcome to The Psychology of Us. This podcast is created by R.J. Starr, a public intellectual and independent psychology educator. The material presented is educational and interpretive, examining psychological life as a domain of understanding rather than intervention. It does not provide therapy, diagnosis, or professional guidance. Each episode stands as a complete work of public psychological inquiry.
There's a very, very good chance that you are listening to this right now while doing at least one other thing.
Oh, almost there, sir.
Right. Like maybe you are sitting in traffic or, folding a massive pile of laundry. Or maybe, and let's be totally honest here, you actually have this deep dive playing at 1.5x speed just to get through it a little bit faster.
Which, by the way, no judgment. We all do it.
Oh, zero judgment.
Yeah.
But it is, it's incredibly ironic given the very specific fundamental shift in human behavior we're exploring today.
It really is the perfect setup because whether you're speeding up an audio track or, scrolling through two screens at once, you're participating in a communication environment that is functionally terrified of a single second of empty space.
Terrified.
We have literally adapted to an environment by trying to just outrun silence.
Which perfectly brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. So we are looking at this really fascinating essay. It's called The Abolition of the Pause by R.J. Starr.
Yes, R.J. Starr.
And for those who aren't familiar, Starr is a theorist in integrative psychology, and he's the creator of this massive framework called psychological architecture.
Right. And psychological architecture is, it's essentially this structural analysis of how humans and organizations operate. So he breaks it down into distinct domains, things like emotion, identity, meaning.
But today we're zooming in on one specific area, right?
Exactly. For this essay, Starr focuses entirely on the mind domain. He is exploring this profound structural shift in our world, specifically how the complete and total elimination of silence in modern communication is actively rewiring our physical ability to think, to remember, and to feel.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we get into how it actually rewires the brain,
I
really think we need to understand how we got here.
Yeah, the history is fascinating.
Because it's not like, a bunch of people held a meeting and just decided to ban silence. Where did this absolute terror of the pause actually come from?
Well, to understand that, you have to look at the very early days of broadcast radio. There was this very strict, localized industry rule, the no dead air rule.
Right, I've heard of that.
Yeah, and back then, a pause wasn't considered a stylistic choice at all. If there was, say, silence between the end of a song and the announcer speaking, or even just a 3-second gap before a station ID, the audience and the station managers literally treated it as a technical failure.
Wait, like they thought the equipment literally broke? Or the guy running the soundboard just fell asleep?
Exactly. The underlying assumption was purely mechanical. But, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, it created a psychological precedent.
Okay, what kind of precedent?
The idea that the listener simply cannot be trusted to wait. Broadcasters genuinely believed that if a gap existed, the listener would assume the broadcast was over and just turn the dial.
Oh, wow. So they were terrified of losing the audience in like 2 seconds of quiet.
Precisely. So an entire generation of media professionals actively trained themselves to eliminate every single gap. The pause just became the absolute enemy of attention.
See, I get how that makes sense for, 1930s radio. It's a very specific context. But Starr is arguing that this localized paranoia somehow became the universal law of gravity for all communication today.
It really did.
Is it really that pervasive? Because it feels like a bit of a leap.
It is entirely pervasive, honestly, to the point where it's automated now. What started as this technical anxiety is now the core organizing principle of all our media. Across every platform, the pause is universally treated as waste.
Okay, give me an example.
Think about television. Starr points out that TV commercials are actually engineered to run at measurably higher decibel levels than the shows they interrupt.
Oh, yeah, I hate that. You always have to turn the volume down.
Right, and they do that to compress the maximum amount of acoustic information into the tiniest possible interval.
Yeah.
There's no breathing room.
Okay, but television is practically ancient history compared to what we deal with now. I mean, when I think about my phone, it is a whole different level of velocity. It makes me think of feeling like a factory worker on a conveyor belt that just keeps speeding up. And taking a breath feels like a failure of productivity.
That is a great analogy, and that's exactly where the broadcast logic reaches its extreme. Social media platforms are fundamentally engineered around the continuous scroll.
Yeah.
The algorithms are so curated that the exact millisecond one video ends, the next one visually bleeds right into it.
You know what really gets me, though? And Starr mentions this, and it honestly blew my mind. The podcast editing software.
Oh, the automatic pause removal?
Yes. There are standard automated features in basic audio software now called pause removal. You literally click one button, and an algorithm scans a 2-hour human conversation and surgically excises the natural breaths, the inhales, the tiny silences between sentences.
It's wild when you think about it.
It artificially crushes the rhythm of human speech just to save, what, like 3 minutes of total runtime?
Yeah, it literally removes the room that speech needs to exist in the physical world.
Okay, so the external media environment essentially treats a pause like it's a manufacturing defect. But let's shift to the brain.
Right.
Because if the outside world is deleting the pause, what happens inside our heads? Like if I'm consuming an audio track with all the breaths removed, I still understand the English language, right? I'm still hearing the words.
Well, you are hearing the words, yes. But to understand what the brain actually does with them, we have to look at how Starr defines the mind domain in his framework.
Okay, break that down for me.
So in psychological architecture, the mind is not a passive receiver of information. It's not this empty bucket that you just pour data into. It is a structuring apparatus.
Okay, let me make sure I'm grasping this. So instead of a bucket, the mind is more like a Lego builder.
Yes, a Lego builder.
Like if you dump a bucket of Legos on a table, that's just a pile of plastic. The mind is the builder that actually needs a split second to pick up a new piece, figure out its shape, and, snap it into the existing structure.
That is a brilliant way to picture it. Experience doesn't just arrive and passively register. When new information arrives, your brain has to actively organize it. It has to interpret it and integrate it into your existing structures of meaning.
Right.
And that physical cognitive act of snapping the Lego piece into place, it requires an interval. It requires a pause.
And Starr uses an analogy about music here that I thought was absolutely crucial for understanding this. He points out that in music, sound doesn't actually carry meaning on its own.
Exactly. Meaning emerges from the relationship between the notes. And a relationship requires duration.
Yeah.
It requires spacing, suspension, and release. If you take a beautiful, complex symphony and you digitally delete every single rest, every breath the orchestra takes.
You don't get a more efficient, faster version of the symphony.
No, you don't.
You just get a car crash of noise.
Exactly. You just get unstructured noise. The rests in music aren't just decorative, they are the structural condition that makes the melody intelligible. And Starr argues that human language works by that exact same logic.
So it's not just about catching your breath.
Right. A sentence isn't just a string of words shot at a listener like a fire hose. The pause after a complex clause actually gives your brain the millisecond it needs to organize what you just heard.
Wow.
And the pause between paragraphs signals a shift in the argument.
So these silent gaps aren't a lack of fluency. They are the actual features of comprehension.
Precisely. The words are the building blocks, but the pause is the mortar.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting because I have to play devil's advocate here. I read this, and my immediate reaction was to push back.
Okay, let's hear it.
Let's go back to the 1.5x speed thing we mentioned at the start. If I train myself to watch a 45-minute lecture on, say, biology at double speed, and then I take a quiz afterward and get an A, aren't I just being a more efficient learner? I got the exact same data in half the time. The Legos still got built.
It's the most common defense of our current media diet. But Starr's counterargument to that is really the crux of his essay. He says you are mistaking the sensation of information reception for actual comprehension.
Wait, what do you mean by shallower? If I pass the quiz, I know the facts, right?
Knowing facts for a short-term recall quiz is completely different from integrating knowledge. When you consume at double speed without pauses, you maintain the sensation of learning because the stimulus is constant.
So my brain feels busy.
Right, your brain feels highly active. But the cognitive work of constructing deep meaning, like connecting that biology lecture to something you learned a year ago or questioning the premise of the speaker, that work is severely diminished.
Because I literally just don't have the time to do it.
Because of cognitive load, your working memory has a strict capacity limit. When information arrives continuously without a break, the mental labor of integrating the last sentence has to violently compete with the arrival of the next sentence.
Okay, I think I need another analogy for this one. It sounds a lot like eating.
Eating.
Yeah, like if I'm eating a sandwich, the nutritional value of the sandwich doesn't matter if someone shoves a second sandwich into my mouth before I've chewed the first. I'm just going to choke. Digestion requires time, and cognitive digestion requires the pause.
That is exactly what happens on a neurological level, particularly with memory. Memory consolidation is a physical process.
Okay.
To move a piece of information from your short-term working memory into long-term storage in the hippocampus, your brain has to create new synaptic connections. That biological process absolutely requires micro-intervals of rest.
Wait, so if that interval doesn't have, if I just keep shoving the next sandwich in, what does the brain do with the data?
It drops it.
Seriously, it just drops it.
Yes. Without a pause, the new piece of information simply displaces whatever came right before it just to free up working memory.
Oh, wow. Okay, that explains so much. That is exactly why I can doom scroll on my phone for 2 hours before bed, read 50 different articles, feel like I consumed a massive amount of incredibly important information, and wake up the next morning unable to recall a single specific detail.
Because you didn't learn, you were just stimulated. The continuous pressure mimics efficiency, but it actually just converts meaning into mere stimulus.
And the crazy part is how accustomed we are to this. Starr talks about this concept of trained discomfort, right?
Yes, trained discomfort.
Because we are so habituated to this high-velocity stream, we now experience actual silence in our real human interactions as an error.
And it is entirely a learned response. To prove this, Starr contrasts how adults handle silence with how children handle it.
Right, language learning.
Yeah, children who are actively learning language do not find pauses aversive at all. They demand them. If you read a story to a toddler, they will stop you. They'll ask you to repeat a line, or they'll pause to ask what a specific word means.
They naturally enforce the intervals they need to digest the information.
Yes, they aren't afraid of the gap. But adults have been calibrated to the machinery. We've developed a tolerance for the absence of silence. And because of that, when an actual pause happens in a spoken conversation, it's physically uncomfortable.
It is agonizing. I literally did this yesterday. I was in a meeting. Someone asked me a pretty complex question. I paused for maybe 4 seconds to formulate my answer. And the silence felt so heavy that I actually apologized.
Wow.
Yeah. I said, sorry, let me just gather my thoughts. As if thinking in real time was some kind of rude imposition on my coworkers.
What's fascinating here is that represents a profound shift in how we interpret human behavior. The interior processing that pauses make visible the actual act of thinking is now mistakenly read as hesitation.
Right, like I didn't know what I was talking about.
Exactly. It's read as evasion. If you pause during a debate, the audience perceives it as a failure of preparation.
So we accelerate our conversations not because we're actually thinking faster, but just to fill the void before someone thinks we're unprepared.
We've completely forgotten how to inhabit silence.
Okay, so what does this all mean? If we take everything we've discussed, the fact that pauses are structural necessities for meaning, that skipping them drops data from our memory, and that we now panic when a room gets quiet, we have to talk about where Starr takes this in the final section.
Because he moves from the mechanics of memory into some incredibly heavy territory.
Yeah, the political and ethical dimensions. And the stakes he lays out are vital. If the pause is where the brain builds meaning, then the interval is also the exact territory where independent thought arises.
Let's walk through that. How does a pause create independence?
Well, think about the gap between hearing a statement and formulating your response. In that gap, your mind does several things. It compares the new information against your prior knowledge, it searches for logical inconsistencies, and allows doubt to take shape. That silence is where you evaluate.
All right, let me push back again then. If I want to be an informed, independent thinker, isn't it better to go on social media and rapid-fire scroll through 40 different perspectives on a breaking news event?
That's what we all do, right?
Yeah. Doesn't getting all those different viewpoints rapidly actually help me build a better, more well-rounded judgment than just sitting quietly in a room?
Starr would argue that you are conflating exposure with judgment. Getting 40 perspectives rapidly is exposure, but continuous stimulation is preemptive.
Preemptive.
Yes. When information arrives relentlessly, it occupies the mental space before your own critical judgment can take root. You are reacting to the rhetorical momentum of the crowd, but you aren't given the interval required to evaluate the evidence.
So I'm just being swept along in the current. I never get the footing to stand still and actually weigh the water.
Exactly. And Starr makes a really important point to keep this entirely structurally focused. Like, this isn't about left-wing or right-wing media bias.
Right, it's just mechanics.
Purely about the mechanics of cognition. Regardless of the political content you are consuming, if there is no pause, there is no space for you to develop a sovereign, independent conclusion about it. You basically become a node that just registers and passes along information.
Which is terrifying.
It really is.
But what hit me even harder than the political aspect was the emotional dimension. Starr talks about this concept of uptake. What exactly does he mean by that?
So uptake is the biological and psychological time required for the emotional significance of a piece of information to actually register in your body.
Because emotions aren't just instantaneous data transfers.
Right. Like when you get bad news, there's that physical dropping sensation in your stomach, but it takes a few seconds to actually hit you.
Yes. And when the pace of our media environment prevents that uptake, our emotional responses become abbreviated. We basically just exist in a state of vague, agitated overwhelm.
The deep, complex emotions get completely crowded out, and Starr focuses on grief as the ultimate example here.
Because grief is slow work.
It is the slowest work. Grief requires a movement inward. It requires holding something heavy and sitting with it. You physically and mentally cannot grieve while simultaneously intaking a continuous stream of new, unrelated stimulus.
And our media environment does not allow for slow work. The whiplash is just jarring.
It's so intense. I experience this almost every day. You're scrolling and you see a heartbreaking article about a devastating natural disaster, or maybe, a personal post from a friend who lost a parent.
Yeah.
And then literally one fraction of a second later, you swipe and you are watching a viral video of a guy falling off a skateboard.
The machinery treats the moment immediately following a profound tragedy exactly the same way it treats the moment before a laundry detergent commercial.
It's true. And it honestly makes you feel slightly sociopathic sometimes. Like, how can my brain just toggle from profound human suffering to a skateboard trick in a quarter of a second?
Because the environment demands it. But Starr's argument is that this environment doesn't merely fail to accommodate grief. It actively makes grief harder to access.
It makes reverence harder to access.
Exactly. The capacity to be moved by beauty, the experience of feeling serious moral weight. All of these deeply human experiences require a form of stillness that continuous stimulation absolutely forecloses.
It changes what we are fundamentally capable of feeling.
And it changes our capacity for discernment. This raises an important question, because discernment isn't just knowing facts or spotting fake news. It is the wisdom to distinguish, to evaluate, and to resist being manipulated. Discernment fundamentally requires the interval.
It requires the time to compare and weigh.
So if we lose the interval, we lose discernment, which forces us to ask, what kind of citizens, what kind of people do we become under these conditions?
If an entire population is habituated to continuous stimulation,
we become oriented entirely toward reaction rather than reflection.
Well,
we are trained to merely register content, not to evaluate it.
Okay, this has been an incredibly heavy, eye-opening exploration, and it is so vital to synthesize what Starr is really trying to tell us here. Because this isn't just an old man yelling at clouds saying, kids these days talk too fast.
Not at all. It's not some nostalgic wish for slower media.
Right, it is a biological warning. The core takeaway here is that recovering the interval, actually allowing yourself to pause, isn't a luxury. It isn't a spa day for your brain. It is a structural requirement for thought.
As Starr says, the space between words is where language actually becomes meaning.
Without the pause, you don't have communication. You just have continuous pressure.
The mind has to organize. It has to relate new ideas to old ones. It has to physically build synapses to retain memory. Those processes are not instantaneous.
They take time.
And by systematically removing the silence from our lives, we are dismantling the very foundations on which a coherent inner life depends.
Knowing that completely shifts how I'm going to look at a moment of silence from now on. When there's a lull in a conversation or just a quiet commute, it isn't dead air waiting to be filled by an audio track at 1.5x speed.
No, it's the only space where your mind actually gets to do its job.
The discomfort you feel in that silence is real, but remember, it is a trained discomfort. You learn to fear it, which means you can unlearn it. Defending your pauses is the first step in reclaiming the architecture of your own mind.
I couldn't agree more.
Which leaves us with a really profound and honestly a lingering question for you to mull over today. If our capacity for independent judgment, our ability to genuinely grieve, and our deepest levels of discernment rely entirely on these quiet intervals. What happens to our fundamental sense of self when we voluntarily hand over all our empty moments to the next piece of content in the queue?
This has been The Psychology of Us. The work presented here is part of a public psychological archive by R.J. Starr. It is educational and interpretive, not clinical or advisory. Episodes are published as finished reflections and are intended to be encountered as complete works.